future for us all in this kind of work. I'd like now to make a land acknowledgement. Here at the University of California, Santa Barbara, I sit on Chumash lands, the unceded territories and waters of the still vibrant Chumash communities. And I want to say that these land acknowledgements have become quite expected, at least in the US context, and performative and sometimes vacuous. The follow-up question being, in what ways are Indigenous communities being engaged by institutions? What institutional responsibilities do we have, and are we following through? In the case of UC Santa Barbara, this is a complicated issue. Some of you know we are directly implicated in the 30-meter telescope dispute in Hawaii, of direct relevance to a number of our guests today. And we have not owned that responsibility in anything like an ethical way, frankly. Closer to home, the very building I speak to you from is in its basement has a repository of many hundred sets of ancestors of the Chumash peoples and their objects. We are woefully behind in repatriating these, but what I can say is in the real-time present, in a nearly day-to-day way, we have finally gotten our legs underneath us and are making headway. There's a new University of California policy that pushes us to do so. And so I'd like to think we're making good on the promise in a small way of these land acknowledgements, and let's all check back in a few more years and see if that continues to be the case. That's the challenge I would make to us all collectively. So what is repatriation? In the shortest possible framing for our purposes, we are talking about the return of ancestors and their objects from colonial institutions to the people from whom they are taken. There are many other possible ways to elaborate on that, but I think as a start, we can begin with that. In the US context, this process was animated in a major way by the passage in 1990 of the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. Similar state laws were passed in Hawaii and elsewhere about the same time. And then of signal importance for us collectively, in 2007, the United Nations passed its Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And then in 2010, several nations who had not signed on did, including the United States, New Zealand, Great Britain, and Canada. So now the UN Declaration is in force, insofar as such mechanisms have force, but it sets, back to our title, a horizon of ideals and expectations that animate local communities on the ground, that animate institutions, give us moral aspirations to orient ourselves by. And I want to share that language with you very briefly, again, to get us on the same page. Specifically, Article 11, Indigenous peoples have the right to practice and revitalize their cultural traditions and customs. This includes the right to maintain, protect, and develop the past, present, and future manifestations of their cultures, such as archaeological and historical sites, artifacts, designs, ceremonies, technologies, and visual and performing arts and literature. States shall provide redress through effective mechanisms, which may include restitution developed in conjunction with Indigenous peoples with respect to their cultural, intellectual, religious, and spiritual property taken without their free, prior, and informed consent or in violation of their laws, traditions, and customs. Article 12. Indigenous peoples have the right to manifest, practice, develop, and teach their spiritual and religious traditions, customs, and ceremonies, the right to maintain, protect, and have access to, in privacy, to their religious and cultural sites, the right to use and control their ceremonial objects, and the right to the repatriation of their human remains. States shall seek to enable the access and or repatriation of ceremonial objects and human remains in their possession through fair, transparent, effective mechanisms developed in conjunction with Indigenous peoples concerned. Okay. So again, that's from the United Nations Declaration. When we speak of repatriation in this key, we are speaking of something that is manifestly local and global. It has become fashionable, of course, over the past 20 years or so to speak of the articulation of the local and the global. But seldom do we get it right in terms of drilling down to the details of what does this actually look like? How is it animated? What are the actual networks? Repatriation, when done in this key, forces us to reckon with this because it's the retracing of colonial and material realities of history in reverse. So it is quite literally the enactment of the local and the global in all kinds of compelling ways. So that's something I want us to dwell on, and we'll see that manifestly in the papers today. Also, what shines through the United Nations discourse I just read is human rights language. This is about human rights and human agency. It's about restoring humanity to peoples, but also to institutions. And we'll hear a fair bit about that, I think, as well. It's about how do museums and institutions re-engage their identities as humane human institutions through these processes. It doesn't necessarily spell the end of them. It signals new possibilities. But not every note is an optimistic note, of course. These processes seldom take hold and take place without friction. We need to acknowledge that. These are simple human facts that when we come together over difficult issues, there is tension. The question becomes, it seems to me, whether we're scholars or practitioners, legal advocates, how do we navigate these episodes of friction? What do we learn from them and how do we do better? But also to have an eye and an ear for the generative potential of friction. One of the things I've seen in studying repatriation contexts over a few decades is how quickly the media and other sources will be to tell a story about how groups fight among themselves. And isn't it unfortunate that good laws don't end up being used in an efficient, collaborative way by Native peoples? I think that's entirely cynical and doesn't at all get to the heart of what's happening, which is quite frequently, as in most any religious or cultural context, people grind and bump precisely because they care so much, because they're refining expressions of just how they care and what they're going to do about it. That's the animation of tradition, not the negation of it, in my view. And I'm so eager to continue to learn more along these lines. The last thing I'll say before turning over to our first presenter is anyone who's engaged in repatriation work through studying it or doing it is the knowledge that this is fundamentally about relationships. And so it is with this panel. All the folks today have engaged one another in some manner or another by way of seeking advice, by way of listening to one another. That networking of relationships is the stuff of repatriation. And so it is the stuff of today. And maybe more of that will come out later. Just a note on process. We have 3 presentations. They'll take on the order of 20 to 30 minutes. And we'll take those in order. I'll introduce each speaker in turn, and we'll hold questions. Then at the end, there will be an opportunity for the presenters to engage one another if they so wish. And then hopefully fairly expeditiously, we'll open it up to audience for engagement. And I can see across the room, we have just a wealth of folks with a variety of experiences and opinions. So I hope you're not shy to chime in. Again, this is being recorded. It will be available on the Walter Capps website. When we get to the question period, you can either raise your hand and I'll scan, and if I'm missing you, please pop it in the chat, draw it to my attention, and we'll make every effort. Okay. Without further ado then, let me turn, pardon me, to introduce our first presenter. Arkotong Longkumer is Senior Lecturer in Modern Asia at the University of Edinburgh in the United Kingdom. He is the author of The Greater India Experiment, Hindutva and the Northeast, published by Stanford University Press, which has been long listed for the New India Foundation Book Prize of 2021. He is also the author of The Poetry of Resistance, the Harappa Movement of Northeast India, and co-author of an open access book, Indigenous Religions, Local Grounds, Global Networks. He co-edited a special issue of Neo-Hindutva published on Neo-Hindutva published by Contemporary South Asia, and subsequently as a book. He is the recipient of the British Academy Mid-Career Fellowship, has had visiting fellowships to the Arctic University of Norway, and is currently the principal investigator on a 3-year funded project by the Leverhulme Trust on Gurus and Media. Professor Longkumer, welcome.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me to talk about my ongoing work. And I'm just thinking if, right. Can you see the slide?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay, so thank you for inviting me again to speak on this occasion. The presentation that I will be making is primarily a work in progress project that has started kind of on and off, and I think the pandemic has affected it. And I think, you know, I've been thinking kind of along these lines for a while now, and hopefully the project will be funded properly in the next like year or so, and you know, we'll be able to do a lot more like work. So I think what I'm presenting right now is primarily sort of like preliminary ideas, I guess, and some of the little field work that I've done to help me try and understand what like digital repatriation like means, particularly in the context of the like Gaidinliu collection in the Pedrovas Museum. So I start off with a couple of questions here that maybe will help us ground or help me ground some of the things that I'm interested in this particular presentation. And also, hopefully, I mean, it'll open up other questions that kind of other presenters might have, kind of including, of course, the audience. So what role can museums play as distributive institutions? And the second question is, how do objects interact with people outside the museum space, and how people in turn find multiple meanings in these encounters? And how do time and distance affect interpretations? And what can the digital museum tell us about online interaction? So these are the 4 broad questions that I'll be kind of asking as I go through the presentation. And again, I mean, these questions are, I think, primarily a way for me to think about the kind of material that I'll be presenting to you all. The context of my research is primarily in the northeast of India, and here's the map. And the kind of like region that I'm interested in is primarily Assam and like Nagaland. And like these are areas which constitute Highland Asia, I guess, and they are kind of like sandwiched, I guess, like between like Bangladesh, China, Tibet, and like Myanmar. And that's the area that I'm broadly interested in terms of thinking about repatriation, primarily of cultural objects. Now, I would like to start the presentation by showing you a picture of the person that I've been actually studying for now a number of years, and her name is Rani Gaidinliu. And the project that I'm primarily examining is her collections. The collections that were confiscated by the British administrators roughly around the late 20s to the early 30s, and were given to the Pedrovas like in Oxford. And these are the collections that I have come to kind of engage with a bit more and come to understand them, I guess, in a bit more detail. Now, that was a photograph taken, you know, of a statue just outside the place I do a lot of my like field work. It's called Haflong in Assam. And like Rani Gaidinliu's kind of like statue is quite prominent. And that shows her kind of like standing like nowadays in contemporary India. She is not only seen as an indigenous like woman, but also largely by the Indian state as a freedom fighter who fought against the British and was kind of integral to bringing the people together, especially in like post-independent India. Now, this picture is quite interesting because this was taken in 1931, immediately after she is captured by the British. Now, she is captured primarily because she's accused of instigating a kind of rebellion against the British Raj. And I won't go too much into it because of time factors, but she escapes to the hills, and then, of course, through like massive operation to try and bring her and her like followers, the British capture her. And these images are quite interesting because, I mean, there are only a few of them that exist, I guess, in the archives. And I got these images from the Cambridge Museum. When she was captured, they also took photographs of her temples, and here's like one of them. And these archives are quite interesting because they give us a like visual evidence, because after these photographs were taken, all of these like houses and temples were like burnt actually by the like British. And of course, you know, in the picture, you can see a couple of the administrators or political officers kind of like standing around the traditional kind of like Naga houses that you see. And it's, yeah, and all of this was like burnt. You also see like one of the like British administrators there with like replicas of like Gaidinliu, who's on the left, and her cousin, as well as like leader of this movement called like Jadinong. And this image is quite interesting because it helps me to try and track the clothes that they're like wearing, which is currently in the Pedrovas Museum. And I will talk a bit more about this particular slide like later on. So in 1931 and all, these activities are like happening, right? So they capture like Gaidinliu, they take all her possessions, including her clothes, her personal jewelry, cultural objects, and so on and so forth. And we fast forward to 2022, where a lot of the collection belonging to like Gaidinliu, and it's called the like Gaidinliu collection, can be found in the Pedrovas Museum in Oxford. And it is with the Pedrovas Museum that I have been engaged with in the past, for the past like 5 years or so, trying to understand these cultural objects, but also trying to take them back, or take kind of images of them back, or this kind of digital aspects of them back to the community in India. So just before the lockdown, I had an opportunity to actually visit the Pedrovas Museum and look at all of the objects belonging to like Rani Gaidinliu. And here, of course, you know, it's like basket where her like notebooks were kept, and these notebooks that she has kept, and she kind of like writes on them. And so here, just on the like right side, I guess, you can see like label that is giving a sense of who like Gaidinliu is, and like when he was captured. And of course, the political officer who was in charge at the time, whose name is J.P. Mills. And here, of course, like Gaidinliu is like described as a like sorceress. And mind you, she was only 16 actually, I mean, when she was captured by the like British and imprisoned. So these are some of the objects that were collected during that time. And this basket has got around 12 like notebooks. And these notebooks are of course important, and I've kind of written about these notebooks. If you're interested in but I won't talk too much about them, just to kind of show you a picture of them and to show their importance, I guess. And just examining these notebooks, of course, you can see different kinds of patterns, symbols, like writings that she has kept. And I opened all of them, and well, of course, I couldn't take like photographs of every page, but I took certain kind of images that really intrigued me, primarily as a way to engage with the community back in India. So I took these on my phone and I kept them. And similarly, I mean, like, a lot of the shawls that were confiscated by the British, and her bracelets, were also taken. And of course, here a sample of them. And of course, on the right side, you can see this like wooden mallet, I guess, which was actually kind of used during war. And this mallet was actually used by Gaidinliu and her followers to attack the British, as they came kind of looking for her. So I mean, all of these kind of objects have been confiscated and of course kept in the Pedrovas Museum. This bracelet I thought was really interesting, primarily because I've seen bracelets of these sorts worn by women, in the villages in India. But what is quite interesting is the kind of intricate patterns, in them that I haven't seen. So I mean, I took a photo of this particular bracelet up close to show it to villagers when I took it. Now, this particular image that I was talking about earlier is quite interesting because, as you can see, the shawls and the cloth are actually in the Pedrovas Museum. So the shawl that say Gaidinliu is wearing is actually the one on the right, this white and black cloth, I guess. And the one which Jadanong is wearing on the right is in the middle of the screen, on the top. So it's quite interesting to actually try and trace the kinds of clothes that the kind of replicas were wearing, but unfortunately I couldn't find the actual figurines, I guess. And so part of the project is try and track kind of if these figurines do exist, and of course, I mean, where they are. So upon taking a lot of these photographs and visiting and trying to understand these objects a bit more, came the part when, or the actual excitement part of this was when I was traveling to India, and I took these images and I showed it to villages. So basically I traveled around the area. I mean, I went to around 6 or 7 villages, and of course I had all of the images on my phone. And here I'm kind of interacting with the community and showing them the Gaidinliu collection. And people are of course intrigued, and people tell me stories about them. So memories are ignited, I guess, and the oral tradition of passing down knowledge and stories have been shared through the process of these objects. And in particular, this older gentleman was quite young when he kind of encountered Gaidinliu. Of course, Gaidinliu passed away in 1990, and he remembers her talking about these objects, right? About the notebooks, kind of about the wooden mallet and so on. So he remembers these kind of objects quite clearly, and to see them, of course, in kind of digital form was of course very, very interesting for him. And to give you another example of the interaction of how when objects leave the spaces of museums and they actually go to the community and they encounter and they engage with the community, here's a particular example of the notebooks. Now, I mean, if you see the person standing in front with a copy of, so I took Xerox copies actually of these notebooks and I gave it to people. And this person in particular, it's quite interesting because he is seen as a prophet, as a visionary, And people often say that he's the one who's going to bring about this kingdom. This kingdom is often kind of described as a time of plenty, like where there's freedom to practice, whatever you want, and where culture is at its strongest. So he, in particular, took the copy of the notebooks and was really, really intrigued, because he was saying to me that someone will come to interpret what the words mean in the notebook. And to show the importance of it, he insisted on taking a photograph with the notebook. So again, showing the kind of materiality of it, but also the importance of it, this kind of vitality of it. Now, a lot of the time that I spent traveling and showing kind of images, on my phone, were primarily quite low tech, actually, because a lot of the villages don't really have electricity and don't really have a lot of technology. So part of the challenge was, how do I kind of approach this project with that in mind? So to go where the people are and to really engage with the senses. And of course, food in ethnography and fieldwork plays an important part. So I actually hung out in a lot of these kitchens where people would be cooking and people would serve me food, and I would show them images kind of these Gaidinliu collection. And one particular kind of image, and again, to give you an instance of how people kind of recognize the symbols, kind of in these artifacts, and which were actually unseen for almost 80 years. I mean, they were kept in the Pedrovas Museum, and people had no idea what the collection kind of actually had. And here I was pleasantly surprised, because I was showing them this particular symbol, in the notebook, and immediately everybody jumps up and said, that is a very kind of recognizable symbol, and it's part of our tradition, and that is called an asarit. So then I was intrigued, and I was saying, can you show me what an asarit is? So kind of immediately in the kitchen floor, this person drew me this asarit, okay? And of course, there are kind of different variations of how you explain this asarit and how do you draw it. But basically, it's an important symbol that shows the revitalization of culture, and is also associated with two important characters from tradition, called Asa and Munstrung. So I was particularly intrigued to see that people actually could still recognize the symbol, which Gaidinliu drew in the 1920s, and how the villagers still recollect this particular symbol of the asarit. And what they told me again was that if you go outside in the village, the symbol is common. So I mean, I went outside during the morning, and here is monolith, and these monoliths are quite common kind of in that particular area, because they're often used as a kind of memorial to say remember someone who's passed on. So these memorials are quite interesting, because if you see the slabs kind of on the ground, these slabs are filled with the asarit. And of course, I didn't notice them, and I was going, how stupid of me, right? So I mean, that's the that kind of ethnographic moment when you actually realize that this particular symbol is all around you, and of course you haven't noticed it. So these symbols are drawn, on these slabs of stones, and of course, here's another variation of the same kind of asarit. And so again, really taking these objects out of the spaces of the museum and showing it to the people and trying to kind of understand what they mean in the cultural context of the people was a really, really kind of revelatory project for me as well, because I entered the field with no assumptions, of course, but at the same time, I was pleasantly surprised that people could still engage with symbols, with the cloths, with the stories around Gaidinliu and so on. So then this takes on a particular kind of like meaning. And of course, part of the project is to actually kind of organize exhibitions and trying to really understand how people relate to these objects that they have not seen in over 80 years or so. So it brings me back to the kind of questions that I started off with. And I think, you know, all of the questions to some extent play a role in some preliminary way in which I've engaged with the like material and how I've taken it to the field in India and engaged with the communities. And I think especially the kind of the like multiple like meanings in these encounters was something that really spoke to me, because, you know, I wasn't expecting anything. I had no idea what these symbols like meant, but yet people were there telling me the stories and the like meaning of the symbols that were kind of in the cultural objects at the Pedrovas Museum. So I think in all of this really kind of enhances the way, well, at least I think about like digital repatriation. And the fourth question is something that I'm thinking about, you know, especially as the project kind of unfolds, is that how do I create this kind of digital like museum that tells, well, I mean, us the stories of all of these objects, right? And how do I capture that? Because one of the things that people often say to me, you know, when I take back objects and I show them, you know, on my phone and so on, is that it's very difficult for the physical objects to come there, because especially in terms of infrastructure, people are quite poor. And so how do I make these objects accessible is a big challenge. And I'm hopeful that this kind of digital like museum could be something that I could create and construct, especially as I think more about the project down the line. So thank you for your attention, and that's it from me.
Arko, thank you so much. What a rich presentation. Eager to hear you say a bit more about it during the question period, but lovely, and the images are so wonderful. The one with you and the little girl in rapt attention at your feet, that's fantastic. And we always appreciate the ethnographic disclosures of the failures in the field, failures to perceive. This makes me, for one, feel better. No, wonderful. Okay, in the interest of time and elegance both, I will have the next team introduce themselves. It's a team presentation from the group, the research team out of Ludwig-Maximilians Universität in Munich, headed up by Philipp Schorch. The team is Philipp, Gesa Grimme, and Noelle Kahanu. And I will now turn it over to them, and please do introduce yourselves. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. I guess, Philipp, do I start our presentation and then, or shall I introduce all of us? What do you think?
Well, I mean, you led this piece, so I think it makes sense for you to also introduce the three of us in the context of the broader group. But I step back to it, but I don't want to hear like a...
Okay, I will try my best. So yes, I'm very happy to be here today and to be able to present on the work we did. Our presentation, I will start it in a minute. It's the presentation of Noelle Kahanu, Philipp Schorch, and me. And it is based on an article we worked on together last year, which will be published this year in May, but only in German. So this is a great opportunity for us to present our work in a more international setting. So it's really fitting and really nice. Our article traces how material entities mostly classified as ethnographic objects, for example, become classified as such, or as, in case of ancestral remains, as anthropological specimens in museums. And it addresses the potential of reassembling and reactivating the material and immaterial cultural connections from which these items and ancestors were taken. And our article, argues for understanding this engagement with these entities through provenance research and restitution as a future-orientated post-colonial memory work. And the article is it's threefold. It starts with my work on the Arning collections, with provenance research I did on these collections. Then it is followed by a section about the restitution process of Iwi Kūpuna from the Dresden collection in 2017, about which Philipp Scheuch will talk. And then Noelle was so kind to provide really touching, really important afterword for our article. And I think she will pull our threads together and will wrap it up. So, and I will just really short, in the following minutes, I will highlight some aspects of provenance research.
Extremism on the
I want to share, I did a short presentation for my part. Philip will show a film, I guess, and Noelle, I think, mostly talks really beautiful without any help. So, so everyone can see it's fine. Okay, great. And the English title of our article, it's Remembering Hawaii, Provenance Research and Restitution, its Post-Colonial Memory Work. I want to highlight now some aspects of how provenance research may assist in the process of remembering cultural connections. And I will show so by revealing how doing historical research on collections reveals the processes of fragmentation and detachment through which ethnographic collections, or what we consider to be ethnographic or anthropological collections today, have become museum collections. Or to phrase this a little bit differently, how they have become dismembered from their cultural context, from the cultural connections. So I start with a little bit of background information. My talk is based on the work I did for the Prussian Cultural Heritage Foundation. In German, it's called Stiftung Preußischer Kulturgut, Preußischer Kulturbesitz. And I did this research in 2018. I was hired to do research on the ethnographic and anthropological collections of Eduard Arning. And Arning was a physician. He specialized in dermatological diseases. And in 1883, he was given the opportunity to research the causes and transmission modes of Hansen's disease, which is more commonly known as leprosy. In Hawaii. He stayed in Hawaii from 1883 to 86. His research was financed by the Humboldt Foundation from Germany, but also from by the Board of Health of the Hawaiian government. During his nearly 3-year-long stay, he amassed extensive ethnographic collection consisting of about 500 items. Yes, and in addition, he also obtained other collections. For one thing, for anthropological purposes, he removed complete skeletons, individual bones and skulls from burial caves and other burial sites. He was a grave robber, so to say. And furthermore, as part of his research, he collected anatomical material and, for example, made photographs and moulages. I'm not sure it's the right word in English, of areas of the body who were affected by the Hansen's disease. He also compiled a number of anthropometric photographs and compiled a collection of hair samples. It is known today, it is known that at the end of his stay, he took all these collections with him to Germany, but not all of them can still be found. His photographic collection remains with the Ethnographic Museum in Hamburg, and the ethnographic collection is housed in the Ethnological Museum in Berlin, and the collection of skulls he took is housed by the, I'm now translating the German name, Berlin Society for Anthropology, Ethnology and Prehistory, the abbreviation. And engaging with Arning's collections, how he obtained them, allows to discern at least 3 sometimes overlapping dimensions of a fragmentation process or processes of dismemberment, which happens when items or things or material entities become museums objects. One dimension is concerned with a very ambivalent relationship between an acknowledgement of historical developments and their dismissal on Arning's part. He stayed in Hawaii in a time where a lot of changes, social, religious changes occurred, and he is very well established in the Hawaiian society, but then again he dismisses all these processes of Hawaii becoming a modern nation state. A second dimension is like the freezing of relationships, which happens through their musealization, which is Arning relied very much on an extensive network of colleagues in Hawaii or friends or acquaintances. He acquired several items via the royal family, for example. But when his collection, the ethnographic collection, entered the museum in Berlin, it slowly all these relationships froze, and they like the collection became just, it was no longer part of a Hawaiian history or entangled history between Hawaii and Germany, but just one collection in a mass of other collections, so to speak. And the last point is on which I want to touch very briefly is the disregard for cultural values and practices, which he shows in his documentations and in the things he
which are inscribed in research in collection modalities, which just require a variety of languages, be the indigenous or colonial, in order to unearth knowledge, unearth histories, and reactivate them for contemporary or future concerns. So the relationships we engage with are very systematic and methodological. They're not just personal, but the personal is a door through which to engage cross-culturally and cross-linguistic. The second point is that process of restitutions, as we have argued elsewhere, can be considered as ethnographic work or ethnographic method. So it's not just a relationship or an activist act of returning something, but the act of addressing the histories Gesa pointed out is very much a tool through which to construct knowledge across domains of difference. So it's a generative process and not just the end of museums or the end of collections. It's the next chapter in a relationship which produces new knowledge and is generative. The same restitution can be considered as an integral part of museologies, and this is what Noelle and I have touched on in a book we published, Refocusing Ethnographic Museums Through Oceanic Lenses. So here you can actually observe across the Pacific of how the very institution of the museum, which did what Gesa was describing, produces something else in different localities where it's inscribed with indigenous worlds, and you see museological reinventions in dialogue with other localities from within. So once again, it's way more than just relationship as a personal sort of nice to have. And the last one is what we point out in this article. So using again the same activity of provenance research, the same activity of restitution through the lens of post-colonial memory work. And that gives once again relationships a very different take, because it enters into the realm in which knowledge is always related to ethics and always related to the question what can and what should be known by whom, what question should be asked by whom and how. And of course, we do have a different take on those questions than Arning had. And I think these couple of points are just key to make the epistemological and ontological and philosophical potentiality of the relationships we engage with. And here, without further ado, I would like to show a short film, because it leads perfectly to Noelle's response to both to the provenance research and the restitutions we have been involved from the German side, and then to Halle, who gives us an update how quite radically this process, particularly in a German context, has evolved just over 5 years. So without further ado, Greg, can I share a screen?
You should be able to.
So I have the power.
You always have had the power.
I have the power, so I will just show you guys a very brief film, which then
Ich freue mich sehr, Sie hier zu einem enorm wichtigen und historischen Moment willkommen zu heißen. Heute übergibt der Freistaat Sachsen aus der Anthropologischen Sammlung des Museums Völkerkunde Dresden das zu den staatlichen Kunstsammlungen Dresden gehört, Iwi Kūpuna, menschliche Gebeine, ein legitimer Vertreter der Menschen von Hawai. Es ist aus Sachsen die erste Rückgabe von menschlichen Gebeinen an die Herkunftsländer der Verstorbenen. Und es wird nicht die letzte sein. Die im 19. und 20. Jahrhundert zumeist durch Raub, Grabplünderungen oder im Zuge der kolonialen kriegerischen Handlungen erlangten menschlichen Gebeine von allen Kontinenten gelangten auf unterschiedlichsten Wegen in die Sammlungen auch sächsischer Institutionen. Sie wurden hier zu wissenschaftlichen Objekten. Heute, nach über 100 Jahren, betrachten wir diese Sammlungen aus einem anderen. Sie werden, man kann sagen, endlich rehumanisiert. Es handelt sich für uns nicht mehr um Objekte. Es sind die sterblichen Überreste von Menschen. Die heute stattfindende, für den Freistaat Sachsen erste Rückgabe von menschlichen Gebeinen nach Hawaii ist auch ein Bekenntnis zu Humanität und Respekt. Gegenüber den Menschen, aber auch gegenüber den Kulturen. Damit wird sowohl ein unrühmliches Kapitel beendet, aber zugleich auf eine neue Seite für bessere Abschnitte im Buch der Geschichte aufgeschlagen, die wir nun gemeinsam schreiben. Dieser Akt öffnet die Türen für weitere vertrauensvolle und vor allen Dingen gleichberechtigte Kooperationen, für gemeinsame Forschungsvorhaben und die kulturelle Zusammenarbeit. Es ist ein Schritt in die Zukunft.
Thank you for the apology that was made, and for the step and the courage of and we are here to say that we embrace that decision and are willing to partner to move forward together now in a productive relationship as human beings, as members of their family of the world. The struggle for us started in 1981, and it started with a simple request. And for 26 years, I struggled to find the right words to say, please give us back. We're not asking for special treatments. We're not asking for anything out of the ordinary. All we're asking for is to allow us to have family back together. And we are grateful and humbled that that message was received.
There is a sea change, and it took decades, and yet it took only moments for the right people to hear the right message. There is a sea change, and we need not be fearful. This is a relationship that has been born for over a century, and you can too celebrate with us, so that they can travel back across the waves that once took them from home. There is a sea change. Revel in the waves that bring us together in the here and now.
You saw two individuals who will speak in about 25 seconds, and I had to briefly tame my dearest colleague. Noelle, I intentionally show this film in the language it's spoken. To me, it's a perfect example, to speak back to Arkotong, when a museum as the distributed institution becomes a distributed institutions, and that requires radical translation across domains of difference. So we have the cultural minister speaking here in German because, quite frankly, her English would be not good enough for a public speech. This is the very reality, and I don't say this judgmental at all. Let alone that she has much knowledge of the Hawaiian cultural universe. She struggles to pronounce Iwi Kūpuna, just as my parents would struggle to do so, and maybe even Arning struggled to do so, let alone to really understand the underpinning and cosmological universe, which led Hale and Noelle visit Dresden. Yet, as you saw in the brief response by Hale in that context, she issued an apology. So you have a radical move in the context of a museum of cross-cultural diplomacy at a significant level. Of course, Greg was also there. So you have a museum, a site which was considered museological over decades or centuries and reduced to sort of static items and photographed history, turned into a site in which cross-cultural action, memory work, ethnographic knowledge production, you name, all takes place. I love to show this film to any audience, and it does resonate. And I always keep the languages, because whatever we do in terms of post-colonial memory work or knowledge production, we still remain in certain aspects, to whom Baba would say, the untranslatable. But that's the beauty in opening space of understanding beyond being able to explain it all. And most importantly, it finishes with Noelle, with her poetic outlook for what can happen if the right people do the right things. So I pass on to Noelle to respond in whatever way she wishes.
Aloha, everyone. I'm Noelle Kahanu. I am an associate specialist in public humanities and Native Hawaiian programs at the University of Hawaii. And I'm a little concerned because it's already 9:20. We have a whole nother presentation and we have Q&A. So I really don't feel like I have much of an opportunity to respond, but I will just say this, which is that I think you—
Kalamai on the interruption, Noelle, please take your time. Mahalo.
So, but I'm respectful of everybody's time here, and this is going till 11. So anyway, what I want to say is that I feel like you folks are experiencing in real time, essentially, what I experienced when I was asked to respond to the paper that Gesa and Philip had co-written. So I was invited to respond to much of the research that Gesa here had presented. And what that entails is sort of as I'll just read it. It was thus with anguish that I read the preceding essay, particularly the details of Edward Arning's multiple incidences of grave robbing, desecration, and theft. He freely admits to stealing the soft kapa coverlet from a child's remains and burial caves, separating them from their bodies, their families, and their communities. Knowingly did so without consent, against Hawaiian beliefs, laws, and practices. An 1860 Hawaiian Kingdom penal law made it illegal to dig up, disinter, remove, or convey away any human body from any burial place. From an Indigenous perspective, we must understand that provenance research is not just about researching past transactions. It reopens old wounds. It re-exposes our Kūpuna to the heva of this past and their shame at no longer being lovingly enfolded in kapa or hina'i, woven baskets, but naked, boxed, and shelved. It exposes us who seek their return to their anger and grief and to our own shortcomings for our failure to bring them home. After all, the burdens of these past wrongs are not only borne by the individuals and institutions who participated in these thefts, but also by Hawaiians today who are engaged in the work of restitution. So I just want to say that I feel like it kind of happened over again because of the specificity of the presentation, because the case is still ongoing, and hopefully, and Halealoa can talk to this, that hopefully it will be resolved this summer. But I think that to continue to talk about it, and on the one hand, like I'm really, we ultimately have to, are grateful. We're grateful to Gesa and other people who, especially because all these records are in, they're in German, you know what I mean? So like, how do they expect Indigenous people to be able to uncover and do the provenance research necessary to bring them home if they're all in a foreign language? So I think that, you know, so some of this has to do with the fact that it's really critical to develop relationships with people, with allies, with people on the ground, with people like Philip and Gesa, who are engaged in this kind of research, and then are willing to share and make available this information to the communities to whom these ancestors belong. But I just need to make it clear that at the same time, yes, the provenance research is totally 100% necessary, especially because these institutions won't even return them without this kind of information which often they already have in their possession, but they're just not sharing it, right? So, but the other thing too is like, this is not a theoretical thing. It is genuinely that the Kūpuna feels shame and anguish, and because we're the ones closest to them in the sense of feeling their emotions, then the impact, it's not like, I don't know, people talk about, you know, intergenerational trauma, whatever, like I like it's real. I mean, in the sense that this isn't like passing from one generation to the next. I'm saying like they're experiencing it in their time, and because of the archival research that brings the past and the present together, we experience it at the same time that they're experiencing it. So I feel, so I guess I'm just feeling a little traumatized because it's kind of like we reenacted the process of my response kind of like literally right now. But just to wrap this up, what I also think is that it is possible to heal the past in the present through repatriation and restitution work. It is possible that, you know, that they're reaching out, the Kūpuna are reaching out to us to bring them home in a way that ultimately closes the cycle and allows for the healing. And as the video that, and Philip, you know, it's in this article, it shows that the healing extends not just to the Kūpuna and to their ancestors, their descendants, but to everybody, including the museums that are involved in this this work of restitution and repatriation. So, you know, if I can just end on a slightly more hopeful note, you know, it is this idea that perhaps in the moment of that heva or that theft, in the moment in which they were stolen from their lands, their families and communities, were the seeds of their return sown in us. And the distance between that original heva and our response, right, in real time is is how long it's measurable and how long it takes us to wake up to our own consciousness and our own understanding that this is the foundation that we must do to begin this process of healing and the truest form of sovereignty, restoring, our nation, our community, ourselves, is through this restitution and repatriation work. Because as long as they hurt, we hurt, and that will never heal until everyone comes home. Mahalo.
Oh, mahalo nui loa. Philip, Gesa, Noelle, thank you so much. So powerful. And Noelle, you took us to a higher plane of engagement here. So I'm not going to intervene other than to ask Edward Halealoha Ayau to introduce himself and to say it's a great honor to have him with us. Our friendship goes back several decades now, and mahalo for being here, and to you all, and I'll step aside.
Aloha kako. So Professor Johnson is our friendship. I'll go far back enough that you guys will turn my video camera on, because it says you're blocking it. Sorry, this is how
well, you got to ask nicely then. Yeah, you remember the time you stranded me?
Yeah.
Now paybacks, right? No, Maeve, are you able to do that? This isn't in my power.
But you cannot start your video because the host is talking. I was like,
I'm looking at it. It shouldn't be the case. I'm sorry. I'll get that fixed.
Not to criticize your technological skills, mine are not far behind, but have you looked at your camera, the click on the side there?
Look, I did, and that's when it gave me the message. You cannot start your video.
Okay, well,
let's ask you to start your video. Oh, yes. So yeah. she had the power. Okay. So Philip, she has it now. Aloha kako. Oau Edward Halealoha Ayau. Hikeke Reynolds Le Aloha Ayau. Kumakua Kane. Mikana wahine o mura moani ke ala ka eo. Kumakua hine. Mai ho'olehua molukai mai au. Aka hinoho vau I Pauka'a Hilo Hawaii, where I'm coming to you live early in the morning. Mahalo Noelle for elevating the discussion to that uncomfortable place that that just has to be acknowledged, and that is the kaumaha, what Hawaiians call kaumaha, the spiritual, emotional, physical anguish that comes from realizing how the ancestors were mistreated, and how long it's been since they were taken, and then the responsibility to go after them, and realizing that in this work there's no room for mistakes, there's no room for failure. So welcome to the pressure of my world. I wanted to just I know we're short on time to just talk about, we just did a repatriation involving 4 museums in Germany that Philip, Isa, Noelle, and Holga, Isabel, and others on this call were involved in. I'm happy to report that the video that Philip showed was awesome, because it really those presentations laid the foundation for what just happened. Okay, what just happened isn't an isolated event. It set a foundation. And when the speakers talked about this need to, we had this horrific book of past history, and it was a challenge to rewrite, to write the new chapter going forward, one of reconciliation, one of healing, one of humanity and respect. So it was just awesome that Philip queued that up, and then Noelle followed up with taking us to that space, because that's what it took and what I'm happy to report, so we repatriated 58 Iwi Kūpuna in February, four institutions in Germany, one in Austria. And the longest case took 5 years. Dresden took 26, just to put that in perspective. So times have changed. The shortest case was less than a year, and technically was 3 days, because we find out on Friday before we're leaving for Germany that the German government was going to block the Jena repatriation because they were opposed to Jena University's commitment to repatriate the remains to me rather than to the Office of Foreign Affairs, a recognized government agency. And so, of course, we shifted gears and OHA submitted a claim and it was approved 3 days later, so we could proceed. But that's a good problem to have, is my point. So we started off, Greg, can you start the PowerPoint? So this was our journey in 2022 in February, and I like to refer to it as repatriating Hawaiian humanity. And return to who we are is a lesson our kumu taught us, that we are our ancestors, and like Noelle aptly pointed out, their hurt is our hurt. Their joy is our joy. So we're in this together. The relationship is interdependent. And I was just, FYI, we were there as Hui Iwi Kuamo on behalf of the Hawaiian Office of Hawaiian Affairs, but we are not part of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. Okay, next. The first repatriation occurred from the Übersee Museum in Bremen. It involved 8 Iwi Kūpuna, and it took 2.5 years from when we first notified them to going there in person in 2020 to conducting the repatriation. It was done at an incredibly high level. In the picture that you see, those are my 2 students, Mana and Kalehua, and they're doing what's called pikai, because the kupuna are in the space, and surrounding them is what we call haumia, or defilements. And so we are cleansing the people that were in the space. The museum held we did a private ceremony to prepare them, but the museum held a public handover ceremony after viewing what happened in Dresden, as well as in Cambridge in 2020. Okay, next. This is again in Bremen in the museum. Again, well organized. After this was done, we were taken to the parliament for the city, where we signed the golden book that commemorates important events in the city's history, and then sat down for a meal fit for a king, where we got to share, what we were experiencing, what was happening to us on a personal level. It was very powerful. It was very healing, and Bremen has really awesome beer. Okay, next. I'll say, so this is the case we work with Holga. Holga's on the call, and his team, and Tarisi, who's here in Hilo, where I am. Gertigen, I hope I pronounced that correctly. This was the second museum that we did a repatriation from. It involved 13 Iwi Kūpuna, and this one took less than a year. That's right. Less than a year from when we were informed. And in this case, we didn't research them, they informed us and reached out to us, had a team of folks to consult. It was very powerful, very informative, and very expedient. So let this be the gold standard of repatriations can be done, but you need a team of researchers. And I'm going to circle back to that point in my conclusion. This is us, and again, Mana and Kalehua, so they are my students, and this was a training for them so that I don't have to go on these trips anymore, and the Hawaiian people can feel confident in their abilities. Okay, next. This is the same one, Gertigen. It was powerful because the healing, as I think Noelle mentioned, that isn't limited to the indigenous claimants. The healing and the emotion of what was happening was affecting everyone. And so, what's important about these ceremonies is the lesson to never repeat these thefts again. And one effective way to do that is to get everyone to experience the moment in which these people died. And how personal, because it's all going to happen to us, and how personal that is, and how painful that is. And that to have more respect for people in their afterlife and never repeat these thefts and takings again. Okay, next. So this is in Jena at the Schiller University. So we were driving from each town. None of us can read German, but thank goodness they drive on the same side of the road as we do. And there was a navigator in the van that the guy switched to English so that we could understand it. And we were able to find all of the destinations. This one was especially powerful. Can you go to the next slide? Because unbeknownst to me, this person shows up to our hotel and walks us to dinner. And I kept looking at him thinking, he looked familiar, but I thought he was one of the staff people. And it turns out he was the president of the university. And he and I had just signed the agreement to transfer the remains to us. And in his presentation, he made it very clear that there was a need for reconciliation and that there was mutual respect for our humanity. And it was, again, another just powerful acknowledgement of the fact that, as human beings, we're not that different. We have different cultural ways, but we have some very fundamental similarities. And he comes from a small village. I come from a small island. We had, again, a great discussion over German beer. So I love repatriation work. Okay, next. This is probably the hardest one we did. This is I can't pronounce the German name, so the English name is Museum for Prehistory and Early History. This is in Berlin. It was mentioned in Gesa's presentation. This one was hard, really hard on us and the Kūpuna. Hard because there was still tension, I would say, honestly, with the museum. Even though they were repatriating, we didn't get the sense that they were completely behind it. and it was clear. Our Kūpuna were very uncomfortable and they just wanted to get out. This was the largest of the EV that we repatriated. There was 32 of them. And this one took the longest, 4.5 years. But it got done, and it got done at a high level. And we are returning to Berlin later this year to complete repatriation of Moipu that's at the same institution. But the EV that belong to them are at another one. And that one is taking time to process. Okay, last couple slides. What's I thought? Oh, again, the same SPK museum. I just really love this because I'm so proud of Mana and Kalihua and how they really came into their own by trusting their own Kūpuna and my guidance to share our message of reconciliation and aloha. Okay, next. And then we went to the beautiful city of Vienna, which I would love to go back to. And this is Mana speaking at the handover ceremony. Vienna involves 2 Iwi Kūpuna, although there was a third that was not, the provenance research wasn't compelling enough to establish the ability to repatriate. And this one took 2 years, so relatively short. And I must say, in all of these cases, the consultations were not contentious. They were actually very informative. We worked with people committed to, finding out what happened, making sure the provenance identifications were accurate, so that these good decisions could be made. Okay, next. The woman in the white jacket is the director of the museum. She wasn't director when we first started, but we had a very, again, just like the others, it was healing. It just was. People were moved by the fact that folks who were not responsible for what happened was willing to apologize for the actions of their predecessors. And that just takes courage and commitment. And we acknowledge that in our Halealoa, in our speeches, and thank the Austrian people for their commitment to our humanity. Okay, next. I don't remember this gentleman's name, but I like his speech the best, because in our speeches we were citing rock and roll songs, anything that we thought was relevant to how we were feeling. I think Mana cited Axl Rose, and what this guy followed up on it and did his own, because he was watching our speeches at the German museums, and it was just incredibly cool to have people that don't know each other, come from different cultures, connect in the spirit of healing. That's why I wanted to show that picture. Okay, next. Should be the last one. Okay, and then I always close with this quote from Gladstone, just because I think it accurately reflects the commitment of the Hawaiian people. Show me the manner in which a nation or community cares for its dead, and I will measure with mathematical exactness the tender sympathies of its people, the respect for the laws of the land, and their loyalty to high ideals. So, like I said, Dresden in 2017 set the foundation for what took place. When she said, "Let us write a new chapter in this book of history together." And I want to end with this thought. So the one thing that needs to change and improve, is ways of knowing, because in all of these cases, we're following Western ways of knowing. You do provenance research, documentation, and if that fails, then the hardcore museums push for physical examination. The super hardcore ones just ignore you and do them anyway. Even though we tell them how absolutely offensive that is. And they tell us, well, if you want your ancestors back, you got to know that they're your ancestors. But what that does is put it this way. If only Western ways are followed to identify the Kūpuna, then colonialism hasn't stopped. Because you see, we have our own indigenous ways of knowing. We have our own, through ceremony, we can tell that those are our Kūpuna. Through a consultation with our experts, we can tell you that these are our ancestors. The question is, will Western science have the courage to recognize that their approach to the worldview, because it leaves out spirituality, only gives them part of the picture? Ours does not. And we want to one day hopefully get the Western thinkers to accept spirituality as a balance, as we do, as a powerful tool in the work that we do. So mahalo nui, and thank you, Greg, for having me.
Mahalo, Halealoa. That was awesome as always, and so great. I mean, I hope it's dawned on everybody. You're talking about the events of 2 weeks ago. Yeah. So when we get back to the topic of this session, horizons, that's the horizon. Now let's move forward, right? Collectively. And I think your words of inspiration, they always hit me in a major and hopeful way. So mahalo again. Mahalo to everybody. Thank you. Awesome. We only have 15 minutes. So I want to ask our other presenters if they have a question for any of the others. And if so, great, chime in. And if not, we'll open it up to the audience. And I can't see everyone's hands. So if one of the presenters did have for the other, just please speak up.
Philip.
Thanks, Halle, for granting permission. I
can see your hand up.
And I'm glad I can see you, that this outrageous technological act of sabotage is over. I just want to wholeheartedly support the final point of Halle, the ways of knowing. This is the heart of it. Because if you remain on the ethical or political plane, you do not get deep into the different forms of knowing and being through which political and ethical issues might arise. So that notion of decentering, of distributing, of multiplying knowledge is of fundamental importance. And I'm also there hopeful, and it will be interesting to see out, because Halle, as you know, museum technologies and photographs and so forth, of course, become also part of indigenous knowledge productions and so forth, because no Western or no indigenous is homogeneous or static. So I do think that the collaborations, it's precisely what I pointed out, relationships are not just personal affairs, but they carry epistemological oomph. And it will be very interesting to see how provenance research, for example, responds to the Na'au and different kinds of knowing. And this is what Gesa studies. So I just want to applaud it as a scholar that you opened the terrain to ways of knowing. It's, to me, of fundamental importance.
Yeah, thank you for that, Philip. Actually, I'm going to just ask our presenters in order if they had comments they wish or questions for the others. So Arko, if you had anything for the others?
Not really, no. Yeah, I think everything has been kind of addressed. I mean, I would like to emphasize the kind of importance of the relations that all of you have been talking about, and the networks, of course. And we have been in touch with Halle as well about, our own process of human dealing with human remains in the Indian context. And of course, we are learning through that process. So we are thankful for these introductions, of course, through you, Greg. So the importance of relations, I think it's something to be emphasized. So thanks a lot again.
Yeah, thank you for being here and for staying up late, to all our European colleagues. Mahalo. Gesa, did you want to chime in?
I have a small question for Arko, because I really liked the questions you posed at the end of your presentation. And I was wondering, because I was thinking about, are you aware of the Invisible Inventories program that the Kenyan Museum is doing in Nairobi? They are building an international database of all objects from Kenya. And it's really... I saw a presentation of Jim Chuchu and Joma Odeng, and they were talking about that when they started, they never thought that this database would evolve into a hub of possibilities. And your questions reminded me very much of their presentation. So it was... yeah, I think you posed very important questions, like the distributive museum, and what can a museum be? So I find it really interesting. So I have no question, more like a comment.
Well, thanks a lot for that. And also, like, thank you for the information. I'll take a look at that. I mean, if you could just type in the chat, you know, the exact like project that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, okay, thanks a lot. Yeah.
And Noelle, how about you?
No, happy to have the audience ask questions.
Okay. And before that, just quickly, Halealoha, did you have anything for your fellow speakers?
No, just really appreciated what Philip, Noelle, and Gesa presented, because you know, it's laying foundation to help educate a whole generation of thinkers in Germany, and frankly helping pave the way for these kinds of conversations to occur. And I also wanted to just point out, I don't know if she's still on, but Amber Adanui. So all the 5 repatriations that we did on this trip were all already done. These institutions had already repatriated to the Maori from Te Papa Tonga. So the path was already, the trail was already blazed before, you know, it's not like we were just showing up, we were the first. So they all knew how to behave, is my point.
Yeah.
Thanks to our Maori cousins, educating them.
Mahalo. Yeah, whether on a repatriation trip, they got it. Yeah, right on. Others, we only have a few minutes, less than 10, but let's open it up. I'll scroll through and see if hands go up. Really, please, we'd love to take your questions or comments. And again, so gratified by the wide-ranging participation, truly an international engagement here. And if I don't see you, just unmute and speak up, assuming you have such power.
Victoria Jennings has a question.
And please, Victoria, jump in.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this really amazing talk. I feel very privileged to listen to you all speak. I was really intrigued by something that Halealoha said. Good to see you again, Halealoha, and hear your words once again. This idea of spirituality in the Western world of knowledge, I'm really intrigued by this idea. I feel like we've begun to see the seeds of this in museum environments through their openness and willing to work with different repatriation groups and kind of come to terms with the trauma that has been wrought by previous actions. And this is a question open to everyone that spoke today, but I'm wondering if anyone is seeing these seeds placed in academia as well, and how do we really approach this in like a learning environment, and how do we move forward with this ingraining of understanding the importance of spirituality in the ancestral remains?
Thank you, Victoria. Any of our panelists want to jump in? And congratulations on your fine work on your doctoral exams.
I just wanted to say, you know, so we've had experiences with this issue before, first with the Phoebe Apperson-Hearst Museum at Cal Berkeley in 1993, because they had 4 Iwi Kūpuna they repatriated to and refused to repatriate the other 2. And we testified before the NAGPRA Review Committee, and part of our testimony involved the ceremony at which we were with all 4 Kūpuna and how we were able to connect to them. And so interestingly, the review committee later identified this testimony and classified it as spiritual evidence. So a lot of Indigenous voices were applauding that. The problem is this: they took the first case and said, oh, there's a historic document that says it came from a Hawaiian burial site, and then there's spiritual evidence. So they recommended repatriation. But with the second one, there was no corroborating historic documentation, except this reference that it was taken from the island of Oahu. And for that one, they said, oh no, subjected to physical examination. So the point is, while they would recognize spiritual evidence, they wouldn't allow it to stand on its own. And for me, even though that case is touted as a victory for this process, it really isn't, because it's showing how, in some regards, like Western thinking is still infantile when it comes to the truth. The reason why we can hear what cannot be heard and see what cannot be seen is because we don't separate our spirituality from our science. Just go up the Mauna and you'll find out for yourself. And so that's important because it's an important tool that we use to see what we need to see so that we can do what we have to do and be responsible. But it's going to take, I guess, a changing of the guard and a growing up, so to speak, of perspective in order to recognize spirituality on its own. It doesn't need, help. It doesn't need corroboration. It speaks for itself. That way you can use all three eyes instead of just one. Wow.
Thank you.
Time is closing short, but we have two questions here. I would like to call on Amber and Teresi, and pardon for using your first names.
Kia ora, Greg. Thank you. Thank you to all the speakers. It was very fortuitous that I was able to Zoom in here. I just saw Noelle's post on Facebook, so it was great timing. But I just wanted to thank all of the speakers. They were really, really interesting talks and the sharing of experiences. And I guess I just wanted to ask, and I can put this out to all the speakers, or if there's anyone that just wants to answer, is what are the changes that you've seen or experienced over time in this work? I know, Halealoha, Noelle, you've worked in this area for quite a number of years. And I just thought it would be interesting for us all to have a better understanding of the change of attitudes, maybe from the perspective of yourselves, and also maybe from our German institutions.
So maybe I'll just take a first stab at this. So aloha, Amber. So good to see you. Love that red. So, I think anybody who's involved in this, in museum work and in repatriation work, can cite examples where the impossible becomes possible, where what you think would take 10 years, as Halealoha says, maybe takes like 10 days. I mean, seriously. So the only conclusion really is that there is ancestral intervention, that they're facilitating their own homecoming, that we like to think, oh yes, it's humans involved in all of this processes, but we're ultimately just conduits for the inevitable. And it's only a matter of how long it takes us to figure that out, right? But I will say, and I'll just use this as an example, the notion of ceding authority versus ceding authority. So I think in the old way, the NAGPRO way, it was CEDE, right? Cede, you're being forced to do something, they don't want to do it, there's hostility, you know what I mean? And then I think as exemplified in these recent international repatriations is ceding authority with an SEED, where it's generative, where it is productive, where it speaks to a future relationship that is sustaining for both. And so I do think that the future, when we talk about repatriation horizons or the directions in which we're moving, it's really more toward engaging, as Halealoha says, in terms of our own humanity, and not based on some artificial legal framework that then justifies action or inaction.
Oh, such awesome words. Thank you. Teresi Sorovi, please join.
Mahalo nui. Thank you so much, Professor Greg. I just wanted to acknowledge all the awesome speakers today. Thank you so much, Halealoha. And I just want to also connect with what Noelle has just said wonderfully, that the change is here. And it's just wonderful to see the humanity, the genuineness of institutions internationally. I must say that I'm I'm a new kid on the block, if I can look at Halealoha's 32 years of work in this field, but I walk in his path and a few others who've gone before me. But I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that the point that he mentioned earlier, that our Maori cousins and the Hawaiians and the Australian Torres Strait and Aboriginal families have opened the pathway. In my case, I'm originally from Fiji, and I want to speak on behalf of our Pacific communities that they have set the way for us. So we're really, really grateful. So I'm here also representing the Pacific Island Museum Association, which is an organization in the Pacific region, which is also looking at repatriation as a way forward. But for the mini museums, it's very new. So we are doing some educational programs in helping our museum directors and our community to be familiar with what repatriation and restitution is all about. But I also want to acknowledge the Noelle's work on the Native Hawaiian Pacific Island Museum Institute, which has just rolled out this year. So it's hot off the press, in which we have 20 cohort members from the whole Pacific region coming in to learn new things about museology and applying things and doing it the indigenous ways. We're trying to kind of do it the way our elders have done it. And we do it in a very loving way. And we're not only going to just learning amongst ourselves, we're going to, of course, share it with our other colleagues around the world. Last but not least, I also wear the hat of the University of Göttingen in Germany. And I want to acknowledge my colleague Holger here and Halealoha. And I love the fact that Halealoha said that your trip to Göttingen, it was, I think, maybe a gold standard, which was less than a year of negotiation, because the University of Göttingen opened the way for us initially. So it was so beautiful. So it was not us in this side of the world knocking on their door, which previously, most of the time the doors are always, knocked back on our faces or not even open. But this time the door was open and they were like, "Hi, Remai, come in," and that was like, yes, this is the way to go. Mahalo nui. Thank you so much.
Oh, awesome. What a note for us all. Thank you. And the energy, we love it. Noelle, did you wish to respond, or are we good? Okay, mahalo. Well, I want to give the last word to Philip, and I should say that were it not for Philip, we'd not be here today. His inspiration to join these groups together to have this conversation. So mahalo nui, Philip, for making real relationships at work and at play, and tell us your thoughts, and then we'll call it a day. And actually, on that note, since I have the floor, I just want to thank everyone for coming. All our guests from all over and our panelists. So I'm done with what I have to say. Philip, take us home.
Well, that was not my intention, but my dear colleague and friend Amber and Tarisu, whom I didn't meet yet in person, the points here I think are of crucial importance with regards to a change, because all we do is, as soon as you deal about restitution, it's a radically entangled cross-cultural domain, right? I mean, we have exemptions when also things or mea were restituted from Bishop Museum to Te Papa, but by and large, it's a global enterprise. And I think from a German context, it's very, very, very important to historicize where we are right now, where we are. And I mean, Gesa is way more knowledgeable than I am. But just a key point, we do not have NECPRA in Europe, in Germany. So there are no legal changes which facilitate this sea change Noelle is pointing. And there are still no laws someone can hide behind or enact to make it happen. So this radical shift comes down to individuals and the knowledge. And we get back to Halle's point. You can't underestimate knowledge claims being made. And when you talk about Western science, it's important to enter this terrain or to cover this terrain, because science in a Western sense, and I have a problem with any homogenized understanding of that, because Bulgaria is very different from Germany. If you look at the work Gesa does, she looks at how Arning constructed knowledge. Now, if you look at how anthropology in a Western sense has changed since then, that's quite remarkable. So the point is, that we need to historicize Arning, but the knowledge he claimed, measuring intelligence and so forth, has also been overridden by Western knowledge itself. And this is very, very important to take into account, because now we actually produce books together. I've been writing with Noelle more than with any other German colleague. This knowledge is traveling. This knowledge informs teaching. This knowledge informs practice, and it's changing what is being called Western science from within. And I think this is the force to be reckoned with, because if you can argue, if you can present evidence, you become so powerful at one point that the doors open, as Therese pointed out. And I've been, as Holger knows, I've been involved in the Göttingen project. It was a sound Western scientific proposal to put this project into place. So it was not just activist driven or to force the university as an ethical and political level, but the point was made that these kind of histories of knowledge production now need to be revisited by decentering, multiplying, and so forth. And I think this is very, very important to take into account, because once again, we do not have the legal force in Germany to seed, as Noelle pointed out. What we can do is run a project like I do for Munich, or my dear colleagues from Göttingen, and there are more and more coming out which are engaged in sincere radical cross-cultural knowledge production, and this is a force which is too strong to be ignored. So on that note, I'm really, really grateful. Greg is also, I need to point out, the ethics advisor in the research group I'm heading. So and I visited the Bjørn Ola and Arko in Norway on the project Indigenous Religions, who work on Sami people, because of course indigenous issues are also in Europe. So those collaborations, I think, which are more than the personal. The personal is intellectual. The personal is scientific. The personal is profound, and the personal has so many impacts. And I'm very grateful that Greg stuck to it. I wanted to visit him on my way to Hawaii, but COVID and other issues made this impossible. So I'm very grateful that we organized it, or Greg took the lead and got the Indigenous Religions group from Bergen also on board. And I appreciate all of your input. The event itself is a key reason why we are where we are. So we can't stop. I appreciate it.
All right, mahalo for that. Everybody, I trust you'll have a good day. And again, gratitude to all, and our speakers especially. I learned a great deal, and I'm eager for my students to get it next. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.